Hello and welcome to this video and to October's book review. So if you remember from September, I said that I might read a fair number of books in the month of October, and I read 7 or 6.5 if you don't include Orange is the New Black, which we'll get into in a minute, but I did also mention it in the last book review, which I'll link up here if you haven't seen it. So October, as the whole of this year, has been a bit of a crazy month with what's been going on, but again, future vlogs and things like that will explain a lot of it. But I did also do jury service in the tail end of September, beginning of October, and I have had a video where I've explained that as much as I could in the parameters of UK law, so again I'll link that one up in the iCard for you. So because there are a number of books to get through, I thought I would jump right in, and as I mentioned, the first one I finished in October, although technically I was halfway through in the September book review, was Orange is the New Black by Piper Kerman. In the September one I said that it wasn't much like the TV show and that the TV show had very much dramatised it, but I mean you can see the similarities. There are definite characters that you very much pick up, and some of the stories that are coming out in the book you also remember from the TV show if you've seen it, as I had, or most of it. But it was definitely more pared down, although yes, she's in prison, it's not very friendly, it's not very pleasant, but she didn't seem to have that bad a time, and also she comes across much better in the book than she does on the TV show, and that she's got her head screwed on a bit more. And it was quite nice to have a book or whatever based in a prison that wasn't just filled with violence. There was very little of it, or very little of that kind of nature, but then again she is a very privileged white woman in that situation. There were lots of people giving her gifts and help and sending her stuff from the outside, so maybe that's why. And as a little aside, there was a movie night where they watched a film with The Rock, and all of the factions of the prison came together because The Rock is a uniter, so go Dwayne. So because I did mention quite a bit of it in September as well, I'm going to move straight on to the next book that I read, which was A Man Called Uwe by Fredrick Backman. So this is actually a translated work. I think it's Swedish, or it's certainly somewhere in the Scandinavian countries. I've heard a lot of good things about Fredrick Backman's writing, so I thought I'd give this one a go. So this is based on a man called Uwe, who is portrayed as a grumpy old man, but I thought he would be older. He's not actually as old as I anticipated when I read the book, but he is a grumpy old man. He lives alone. Unfortunately, his wife has passed away, so he's quite lonely and is looking for ways to commit suicide, so trigger warnings there for that kind of thing. But the people around him, I was going to say sort of pull together, and that's why, but they just do things that irritate him, which means he can't complete the act. And without going into further detail and giving you spoilers, so although he's a really grumpy old man and he is quite cantankerous, there's something about him that you just really like. He comes out with some really good, or not good, but amusing lines about people, and he's got no filter whatsoever, but even with all of that you still like him. And it's all very much a don't judge a book by its cover kind of thing. For him, you definitely need to peel the layers to get to the true Uwe and all of that kind of thing. It was very much a look at community and community coming together and helping each other out and all of that kind of thing. So it was enjoyable. I would say it was a bit slow in places. I did get a little bit bored at points. I normally struggle with translations, but this one felt very easy, which was nice. I understood it all. Normally there's bits of it and references in it that sometimes in translations that you just don't get, but this one didn't have it, which was good. But it did have patches where I thought, come on, we need to move on now. There's nothing happening, come on, let's hop it a bit. And I very much enjoyed his relationship with the cat. That was rather enjoyable too. I do have another one of his books on my Kindle, so I do look forward to reading it. I think that's My Grandmother Sends Her Regards and Her Apologies, or something like that. I think it's a longer title. And there is one called Anxious People that I would quite like to get my hands on, because I think that one sounds interesting as well. So definitely A Man Called Uwe has been a good introduction to Fredrick Botman's writing, and is an author that I look to read a few more from him, because I did enjoy it. There was just a few pacing issues, I guess, for me. So that's A Man Called Uwe by Fredrick Botman. The third book, these are all on my Kindle at the moment because we're still in the sort of jury service bubble, and it was much easier to take a Kindle than my physical book. Although saying that, if you do, when you go in to deliberate in the jury room, you do have to put it in a padlocked cupboard along with anything else that can access the internet. But I mean, you weren't going to be reading at that point anyway, but just an aside that I don't think I mentioned in the previous video. But anyway, the book that I read was Haunted Spouse by Heather Macallister. This is a Harlequin romance, which I assume is an American thing, bit like Mills and Boon, but American. So this follows our main character Lizzie, who creates those haunted houses. If you've ever seen any of the sort of Tim Tracker videos where he's going to Halloween Horror Nights and that kind of thing, she creates those, but more for sort of small town haunts, that kind of thing. And that is her job. She's an architect, but she just designs these haunted houses. And then her ex-husband Jared, part of the reason why they broke up is because he thought she should do serious architecture, but then he calls upon her help to create a haunted house. This is one of those free Kindle books that I got when I first got my Kindle a good 10 plus years ago. I saw the title and thought, I'm going to read that this October. So I really went in with very, very low expectations, thinking it was going to be pretty pants, to be honest, but it might be entertaining pants at that. But yes, it was cheesy, it was predictable, it followed every trope that you would expect in this kind of book, but I actually quite enjoyed it. I liked the fact that it was a familiar story but with an unfamiliar backdrop. For those of you that don't know, which is probably most of you, I'm a big wimp and would never go into one of these Halloween horror houses, haunted houses anyway, because I have an overactive imagination and they would scare the bejeebers out of me. But I do enjoy watching the videos and having the insight of how they're built. How accurate, I don't know, and this is written in like the 80s or 90s or something, so things have probably moved on. But understanding how, you know, the flow of people and all of that kind of stuff from this book was really interesting, and something I didn't expect to learn, or at least to understand a bit more. As I said, it was very predictable, you knew where it was going. Lizzie is a temperamental, over-dramatic woman, shock horror. Jared is a cold, sort of doesn't show his emotions, can be a real pain in the ass sometimes. And then you've also got Helen, who is the woman that was in the middle of their relationship when they were married, but, you know, comes in as well. And I have to say, she's probably my favourite character. If I was to play any of them, she'd be the one I want to play, because her character is the most fun. And there's a whole storyline there that I won't go into and spoil it in case you ever want to read it. But it was a very short, very quick, very easy, pretty enjoyable, Halloween themed read, and I am surprised how much I did enjoy it. So that was Haunted Spouse by Heather Macallister. We now get into the actual physical books I read. So I started with My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This follows Vanessa, who, when she was about 15, was groomed by her school teacher in a fancy boarding school. And we see her at that point, but we also have chapters in the present day where the Me Too movement is going on and people have come out to accuse the teacher, and she's coming to terms with that and all of this kind of thing. I was expecting it to be a tough read and one to make me think quite a lot, and I suppose it did do that. But mainly one of my things was, why is the teacher always an English teacher or an art teacher or someone in that kind of sphere? Why is it never maths? Why is it always a creative subject that is always the one that ends up in a relationship with the child, the school pupil? Yeah, it was a reasonably tough read because of the subject matter, and there were points that it made it did make me feel uncomfortable, but that's what it was designed to do, so it did it pretty well. You can definitely see the confusion as her as a 15-year-old knowing what she's doing isn't right, but also that sort of first love, that bubble, all of that kind of stuff, and her really grappling with it, but then as an adult, because of one reason or another, really doubling down on no, we were in a relationship, we loved each other, and how the years have passed and how that manipulation has actually carried on throughout her adult life. And I also liked that it didn't romanticize it. You very much got that this wasn't, the power balance in this relationship was off, basically. There are some books that cover this topic where you do wonder about how romanticized they've made the relationship and how much in love these people are, but you don't really get that with this, which I appreciated because I didn't want that from it. There are a lot of references to Lolita, which you could probably imagine. I think it probably leaned into that a bit too much. It did get a bit repetitive with it, and I didn't need quite as many references to Lolita as there was. But then our main character took a lot of solace from that book, which is also why there were so many references. The other thing is I found that the text was a bit small and the chapters were too long, so because you are reading a slightly more difficult subject matter, it was then exacerbated by the fact that it was smaller text and longer chapters, so it felt harder to read, and not because you're feeling uncomfortable with it, but just physically harder to read. So it's a hard one to say whether, you know, I recommend or I enjoy or anything like that, just because of what is inside the book, but I do think it is done well. I do think Kate Elizabeth Russell explores the subject with the right balance of, you know, teacher to 15-year-old and that kind of stuff. I probably won't reread, but I am glad I have experienced the book. It was a definite shift from Haunted Spouse, let's say that, but that was My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. Now the next two books, I probably read them in the wrong order, but the next one I came to was Girl A by Abigail Dean. So this, again, is a tough read. It follows our main character Lex, who was one of 7 children, I think, that were essentially held captive by their parents. It was called a House of Horrors, that kind of thing, and we come to them later on where both parents have now passed away, and they have to work out what they're going to do with that house that they were held captive in, but obviously we flash back to see what happened. The concept of it, 3-4 lines, so I'll read the back, is: I am Lex Gracie, but they call me Girl A. I grew up with my family on the moors. I escaped when I was 15 years old. Now something is pulling me back. So the concept sounds interesting. It's very much branded like a thriller, I think by the cover, but it's definitely not a thriller. And this was my main problem with this book. I was going into it expecting something thrillery, you know, now something is pulling me back. I thought there was going to be big twists and things like that. It's not. It's very much a literary fiction look at this kind of thing. If I'd gone into it with that knowledge and that understanding, then I might have, enjoyment's the wrong word because of the subject matter, a bit like My Dark Vanessa, but I might have appreciated it a bit more because the writing was pretty good, and the way that the things were described both in the present and the past was well done, but I just couldn't really get on board with it. I had several things that I found frustrating or didn't particularly like about it. So as I said, we switch between the past and the present, but I found this very jarring. There were points I didn't know when I was in the past or the present, and this is because this book is about 330 pages long, but it only has 7 chapters in it. So obviously those chapters are incredibly long. I think we probably should have had shorter chapters and very clear past, present. And also, we are following some horrific event, but I didn't find it that dark or disturbing. Where my Dark Vanessa made me feel physically uncomfortable at points, this one didn't. I didn't feel huge empathy to the characters. I didn't find it that engaging, to be honest, and I was quite disappointed with it. I had put it off until October because I'd heard that it only had 7 chapters, but as I went into it thinking it was a thriller, I thought, well, maybe it's 7 chapters, but a lot happens, so we'll, you know, it'll push the book along. But that wasn't the case at all. So I probably wouldn't recommend Girl A by Abigail Dean, which is a shame because I do think the premise had a lot of promise. So there we go, Girl A by Abigail Dean. Now, as I said, I probably should have interspersed those 2 sort of heavy emotional books with the Ex Hex by Erin Sterling, but I didn't. I read it after the 2. I was also watching the TV programme about Jeffrey Dahmer at the time of reading these 2, so as you can probably tell, my mood was a little bit low. So moving on to the Ex Hex was a welcome reprieve. So this follows our main character Vivian and her family, who are witches. They live in a town where some are witches, some aren't, but they don't know that there are witches there. When she was in her late teens, like 19 odd, she'd fell in love with one of the founders of the town, or the place that they live, called, what's his name? Rhys Penhallow. But they broke up and she was very angry and she put a hex on him. And then he, several years later, comes back and lots of things go wrong. It's very much a rom-com-y, sort of Bewitched kind of vibes to it. There are things that happen in it that reminded me a lot of Hocus Pocus, such as the talking cat. I guess we could have gone for Sabrina, but Hocus Pocus was more in my forefront because of our Halloween video and that kind of thing. And I enjoyed the characters. Now, whether I'd read this book not after such heavy books, would I have enjoyed it quite as much? I don't know, but I appreciated that it was very fast moving. There was a lot of stuff happening because as the hex went across the town, it resulted in a lot of things happening. There were murderous toys, ghosts, all sorts of stuff, so there was something happening within every page basically. And I thought it was paced really well, and I do enjoy a second chance romance. But saying that, I wouldn't say this was the best written book I've ever come across, but then I guess it doesn't really matter with what's going on in here. But I also don't think it's going to have much of a lasting impression on me. It was enjoyable. I enjoyed the sort of secret witch part of it, the normal university life that also had the secret witch department, all of the sort of nods to all of those 90s witch things like Hocus Pocus, Sabrina, all of that kind of stuff that I've already mentioned. But will it stay with me? Possibly not. But I did enjoy it, so maybe Halloween 2032, 10 years time, I might pick it up again and have another enjoyable time, having forgotten everything that's in it. So that's the Ex Hex by Erin Sterling. So then the last book that I read was back on my Kindle. I don't know why we read so much on my Kindle this month, but we did. And that is Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bazterrica. I'm not sure if I've pronounced that right, but there we go. So this is another translated fiction. I think it was from Spanish, and it's basically a dystopian, or kind of like a dystopian. We're in a society where there's been a massive virus illness thing that has affected all the animals, making them not being able to be eaten by humans because it would make the humans ill. So they've all been slaughtered, no animals are existing, and all the ones that are, people are very scared of. So instead, to get the meat fix that the humans want, they have signed off the slaughter and breeding and consumption of human meat. So that is the general premise. There's also a storyline about a man and a woman who was bred to be fed. to be slaughtered and to feed others. And yeah, it was quite a visceral book. There was an awful lot of writing about how you go about slaughtering a human, the process of that, the process of making their skin into leather, conditions to keep them in so that they're bred right, making sure that you've got essentially the studs and the people that are going to be impregnated. Very, very visceral with all of that kind of stuff. Some could argue it was a bit of a pro-vegan propaganda, because it did make you think twice about eating meat. There are also lots of nuances that you probably wouldn't think about. So there's lots of points in the book where you're reading it and obviously it sounds very much like the slaughter of a pig or a cow or whatever, and then they drop in the word human and you go, oh yeah, this is a person. There are certain things that you wouldn't think about, like the fact that if human meat is the only meat that you can eat, that people might try and pinch them before they're cremated, so you have to watch the body be cremated. There was a line about, we're going to cook up this child because they have the best meat, because somebody's had a baby. So lots of things like that you go, this is really weird and a bit too close to home. So it's a very memorable book, unlike the Ex Hex, it was memorable. But saying that, again, I was a little bit disappointed with it because it was too much about the process and stuff, and there was very little story. And the story that was there was very predictable. I wanted more dystopian from it. Obviously, we're in a world that we don't have at the moment, but I wanted there to be, I don't know how to explain it, but I wanted there to be more from it. It's another one where I thought it was a really interesting premise, and to be fair, a lot of the part that I thought was interesting, but then there was no story to it. So again, it's a very short book, it's only like 200 odd pages, just over, and I feel I know a lot about the start to finish of the process, the slaughtering process, but no story, and I like a story to help drive something along. So it got very, and I don't want to say it because it sounds wrong, but it was rather boring at points, reading about how they were slaughtering humans, and that shouldn't be the case. So I would recommend it just because of how visceral and how just jarring some of it is, but it's not a story, which is a real shame. So that was Tender as the Flesh by Augustina Bazterrica. I really struggle with that one. So there you go, there are all the books that I read in October. Some good, some not so good, and a lot of ones that made me feel a bit uncomfortable. So as I said at some point, I'm not hugely into the spooky stuff in Halloween, so I tend to take it to try and read my sort of darker fiction, and I definitely did that. I just think I should have interspersed it with a bit of lightheartedness, or maybe not watched a programme about Jeffrey Dahmer at the same time. But there you go. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!